Hey there, and welcome to This Explainer. If you're a focused learner trying to make sense of the incredibly complex geopolitical standoff happening right now in the Middle East, well, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're going to completely unpack a major strategic paradox, one that is currently baffling Western military thinkers when it comes to Iran. We're going to look way beyond the daily headlines and the missile strikes and dive deep into the cultural, historical, and theological context that actually drives Iranian military strategy. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the deterrence puzzle. Travel back in time to the Battle of Karbala, examine the real meaning of Shahadat, see exactly how that fuels asymmetric warfare, and finally, look at the very real consequences for the US and Israel. Because to truly understand today's modern warfare, we actually have to journey all the way back to 7th century Islamic history.
Section 1. The Deterrence Puzzle. Why Overwhelming Force Fails.
So I want to pose a pretty provocative question to you right up front. Why might overwhelming military force fail to deter Iran? Just think about that for a second. Traditional military strategy, especially since the Cold War era of mutually assured destruction, fundamentally relies on one basic thing: an enemy's absolute fear of death and their underlying desire to survive. But what happens if the adversary you're facing doesn't actually share that fear in the same way?
Well, standard Western deterrence assumes that survival is the ultimate goal, right? You build up this massive, overwhelming force so the other side backs down just to preserve their assets and their lives. But the Iranian revolutionary system follows a completely different ideological trajectory. Elements within Iran actually view survival amidst destruction as divine vindication. And crucially, they view defeat and death as a sacred martyrdom. When survival and destruction both validate your ideology, the whole traditional logic of deterrence is flipped completely on its head. To really understand this, we have to look at how different nations view war itself. The US and Israel primarily rely on what military analysts call instrumental warfare. It's basically military action executed as a practical tool to achieve a really tangible goal, taking a hill, destroying a weapons factory, securing a border. But Iran's doctrine is fundamentally different, and to see why, we have to look to history.
Section 2. The Battle of Karbala, the Historical Paradigm.
This isn't just some ancient, forgotten history. An event from 680 AD is directly dictating modern geopolitical maneuvers today. Back in 680 AD, Imam Hussein, who was the Prophet Muhammad's grandson, refused to swear allegiance to the ruling caliph, Yazid, basically protesting his unjust rule. Hussein and this tiny entourage were surrounded in the desert of Karbala by an army of nearly 30,000 soldiers. Cut off from water for days, Hussein willingly faced this drastically superior force. On the 10th of Muharram, a day known as Ashura, Hussein and his 72 followers were brutally massacred. They made a conscious, deliberate choice: death over submission to oppression.
Now, for centuries, Karbala was historically mourned purely as a profound tragedy. It was a reason for weeping and submission. But then, in the 20th century, a really crucial shift occurred. Thinkers like Musa al-Sadr in Lebanon began teaching that Hussein's martyrdom shouldn't just be mourned, it should be celebrated and actively imitated. The narrative was totally redefined into a blueprint for active, defiant rebellion against oppression, literally no matter the odds.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the Iranian sociologist Ali Shariati framed the shift. He famously stated, "Death chooses those who are not brave enough to choose martyrdom." Shariati, whose writings heavily influenced the 1979 Islamic Revolution, taught that Hussein's death wasn't a defeat at all. It was a victorious, conscious choice designed to expose the oppressor. Section 3. The meaning of Shahadat. Active martyrdom. In this very specific cultural context, Shahadat does not mean being accidentally killed in the crossfire of a battle. It means a purposeful, highly conscious choice to bear witness, which, by the way, is literally what the word means, and to fight oppression by sacrificing one's own life. A shaheed, or martyr, actively negates their own existence for a sacred ideal. It's viewed as an ultimate goal, the absolute highest rank of human achievement, not just a tragic accident. This distinction is brilliantly illustrated by how Iranian strategists today contrast what they call the Black Death and the Red Death. The Black Death is passive. It's dying miserably and uselessly in submission. But the Red Death, that is an active, chosen martyrdom. By willingly sacrificing themselves, the martyr exposes and humiliates a vastly superior oppressor. It literally turns their blood into a permanent, undeniable message that ensures their cause survives, even if they physically do not. Theologically, this concept is so powerful that a martyr is believed to require no traditional washing or shroud before burial.
Their willing sacrifice is seen as instantly purifying. The logic here is pretty profound when you think about it. Throwing away one's physical life is actually considered the very highest form of preserving the community's spiritual life and historical destiny.
Let's move to Section 4 and see how this builds into asymmetric warfare and martyrdom, blending TNT and ideology. You essentially have a stark clash of two completely different military doctrines here. Western doctrine focuses heavily on overwhelming technology to achieve total battlefield victory, usually through centralized, high-tech strikes. But Iranian asymmetric warfare offsets that technological inferiority with a totally different focus. Their core asset is the human factor and religious zeal. Their primary goal isn't necessarily to conquer the battlefield, but just to stand undefeated and ensure strategic survival. Tactically, they rely on decentralized units, proxy forces, and, uniquely, martyrdom operations.
To see what this looks like in actual practice, consider this quote from Major General Mohsen Rafiq Dost, the former minister of the Revolutionary Guards. When referring to the 1983 bombing of the U.S. Marine barracks in Lebanon, he stated, quote, "Both the TNT and the ideology which in one blast sent to hell 400 were provided by Iran." This is exactly what analysts call expressive warfare. The destruction isn't just about making tactical gains. It's a profound religious and ideological statement powered by a willing martyr.
So, while Western militaries are out there spending billions developing stealth jets and hypersonic missiles as their ultimate weapons, Iranian leadership views the ultimate Wunderwaffe, or absolute weapon, as something entirely different. For them, it is the deeply cultivated martyrdom seeker. They genuinely believe that a fighter who actively desires death simply cannot be deterred by the threat of death.
Let's summarize the key tenets of Iran's asymmetric response based on the source material. First, they decentralize forces so American or Israeli air power can't just destroy them in one massive blow. Second, they multiply their reach using allied proxy forces like Hamas and Hezbollah. They emphasize religious zeal way above physical hardware. And crucially, as military researchers continually point out, Iran is the only state in the world that officially cultivates committed personnel for suicide missions, treating martyrdom as an integral organic unit of their military force structure.
Section 5. Consequences for the U.S. and Israel, the Long War.
So, how does this doctrine dictate the realities of the conflict we're seeing today? Well, according to the analysis, Iran's strategy operates in 3 distinct steps. Step 1, avoid a spectacular burnout of their missile and drone stocks because they know they simply can't match U.S. and Israeli air power symmetrically. Step 2, pace the fight by stretching the conflict across time and space, hitting various fronts all at once. And Step 3, create endless regional friction. Iran is betting on endurance. They're trying to exhaust their adversaries economically and psychologically over a long period, whereas the U.S. and Israel typically bet on rapid, overwhelming force. So the crucial point is this: the deep-rooted concepts of Shahadat and the history of Karbala make traditional deterrence almost impossible against this doctrine. Overwhelming force rarely breaks a movement that is entirely driven by a sense of ideological destiny. In fact, military pressure often intensifies their internal cohesion. It validates their narrative of being the oppressed fighting the oppressor, exactly like Hussein at Karbala. If they survive an attack, well, it's proof of divine favor. If they're killed, it is instantly recast as sacred martyrdom. It is a closed loop where the threat of destruction totally loses its conventional power.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly profound question to consider. If an adversary has structured their entire worldview so that both survival is seen as divine vindication and total defeat is embraced as sacred martyrdom, can a traditional war of deterrence ever truly be won? It's a strategic puzzle that completely redefines the limits of military power in the modern age. Keep that in mind next time you're watching the news unfold. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.